Blowing ad budget on metrics that look great till the CFO sees them, that's bull spend. And marketers are calling it out in Dashboard Confessions.
I remember telling my boss, it'll be good for the brand, when leads were slow. Yeah, it wasn't.
Cut the bull spend. LinkedIn lets you target by company, job title, and more. Advertise on LinkedIn. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a $250 credit. Go to linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The old mill at Washford stands quietly beside the road now, its waterwheel preserved behind glass, its machinery cleaned and lit for diners and passing visitors. But the building itself belongs to a much older landscape. Long before it became a restaurant, before the roads widened and the villages around Redditch spread outward into one another, this was a working place, shaped entirely by water, labour and repetition. Even now, beneath the noise of conversation and cutlery, there is still the sound of the flow beneath the building, moving in darkness, exactly as it has for centuries. Washford lies just outside Studley, on ground long connected to the River Arrow and the smaller watercourses feeding into it. The countryside here once supported scattered manors, agricultural strips, fish ponds, mills, and woodland management, connected to the medieval economy of Warwickshire and Worcestershire. The area sits close to the old industrial heart of Redditch, though before the needle trade transformed the district, this was a rural landscape of tenant farming and water-powered industry. Mills were among the most valuable structures in medieval England, and wherever reliable running water existed, communities built around it. A mill was not simply a building, it was a necessity. Grain had to be ground, livestock feed had to be processed, trade depended on it. Entire local economies moved according to the turning wheels, like the one still preserved at Washford. Although the exact modern name, Washford Mill, does not appear directly in surviving Domesday entries, mills are recorded within this immediate area in 1086. The historians generally accept that milling activity existed here, or very nearby, from at least that period onward. The continuity of the site strongly suggests repeated rebuilding on the same water source across many centuries. Like many English mills, what survives today is unlikely to represent a single construction phase. Instead, it reflects generations of repairs, extensions, rebuilding, adaptation, and industrial change layered over older foundations. The present structure is usually dated to around the 17th century, with some sources placing substantial rebuilding work around 1664. By that point, England itself was changing rapidly. The medieval world had long disappeared. Trade routes had expanded. Rural industries were becoming increasingly specialised, and in the Redditch district, one industry in particular would eventually dominate almost everything around it: needles. By the early 18th century, Washford Mill had become tied to the growing needle trade that made Redditch internationally important. Around 1730, the mill appears to have been converted for needle scouring. This was not glamorous work. Redditch's prosperity was built on highly repetitive industrial labour, carried out in workshops, mills, sheds, and factories scattered across the district. Needles had to be polished, sharpened, sorted and finished, often using dangerous machinery powered by belts, wheels and grinding systems. Water power remained central to much of this process before widespread electrification. At Washford, the wheel that had once turned for agricultural production became part of industrial manufacturing instead. For nearly 2 centuries, the building remained connected to that trade. The surviving structure still reflects that industrial use, more strongly than its medieval origins. thick supporting timbers, internal machinery spaces, wheel housings, and the relationship between the building and the watercourse all point toward long-term adaptation rather than preservation. Archaeologically, the site is best understood as a continuously evolving industrial location. Like many old mills, parts of the earlier phases likely survive hidden within later construction, though there appears to have been little large-scale excavation carried out there in modern times. Much of its history survives instead through structural evidence and local industrial records. That long continuity matters when people talk about the atmosphere of the place. Unlike castles or manor houses, mills were not built for ceremony or prestige. They were working environments, loud ones, dangerous ones. Places where the same physical actions were repeated day after day, year after year, by generations of workers whose names were mostly never recorded. Waterwheels never truly rest. Even after the machinery stops, the sound remains in the structure itself. Timber creaks, stone settles, water moves underneath the floors. Buildings like this retain movement in strange ways. The haunting reputation attached to Washford Mill is relatively modern in documented form. There are no surviving medieval ghost stories connected specifically to the site. No Victorian newspaper reports of hauntings that can be firmly verified. And no named historical figure conclusively linked to the experiences people describe there today. That distinction is important. What exists instead is a collection of more recent accounts associated with the building during its later life as a public venue. First as the old Washford Mill pub, and later as the Miller and Carter restaurant. The most widely repeated story concerns the figure of a woman seen near the waterwheel itself. The reports are generally consistent in only a few key details. Witnesses describe a female figure appearing briefly near the wheel, sometimes seeming to move through the structure before disappearing. There is no detailed description that remains consistent across every account. No name accompanies the sightings. No specific historical identity has ever been verified. What stands out instead is the location. The reports remain tied almost entirely to the wheel and its immediate surroundings. That detail gives the story a strange kind of credibility, or at least consistency. The experiences are not spread randomly throughout the building. They return repeatedly to the oldest and most visually dominant feature inside it. One former member of staff described noticing movement near the wheel late in the evening after customers had left. The building was quiet at the time, with only partial lighting left on during closing procedures. They reportedly caught sight of what appeared to be a figure moving near the wheel housing before disappearing almost immediately. The experience unsettled them enough that they later mentioned it to colleagues, only to discover similar stories were already circulating among staff. Another account, repeated locally for years, describes patrons glimpsing a woman-shaped figure reflected faintly near the wheel area while seated nearby. Again, details remain limited. There is no dramatic confrontation, no spoken message, no clear facial description. The sightings are brief, uncertain, and over almost as soon as they begin. That uncertainty actually separates the reports from many exaggerated modern ghost stories. People describing these experiences rarely claim certainty about what they saw. Instead, they describe movement, shape, presence, and the uncomfortable feeling that someone had passed through the room when no one should have been there. Over time, assumptions naturally formed around the story. Some local retellings speculate about industrial accidents involving the machinery, while others suggest the figure may belong to an earlier period of the mill's history. However, no confirmed historical record has been found linking a woman's death directly to the waterwheel. That absence matters. It does not disprove the experiences people describe, but it does mean the tragic backstory, often attached to the apparition, remains speculation rather than evidence. In many ways, the woman at the wheel resembles what paranormal researchers sometimes classify as a residual haunting. The figure does not appear to interact with witnesses directly. She is not described communicating, reacting, or acknowledging observers. The movement itself seems repetitive and location-specific, almost tied to the physical environment rather than to individual people. Whether one interprets that psychologically or paranormally, the pattern remains remarkably consistent. Another recurring figure associated with the building is an elderly man, reportedly seen near the alcove area between the bars close to the kitchen. Unlike the woman at the wheel, this figure is generally described as stationary. Witnesses speak of seeing an older man standing silently in the area, before realizing moments later that nobody is actually there. One account came from a member of staff carrying glasses through the bar area during an evening shift. Looking toward the alcove, they believed the elderly customer was standing partially in shadow near the wall. Assuming someone had remained behind after closing, they reportedly turned back to continue working before realizing the figure had disappeared completely when they looked again. The experience stayed with them, largely because of how ordinary it initially appeared. There was nothing theatrical about it. No sudden appearance, no dramatic vanishing, simply the strong impression that someone had been standing there moments earlier. Other reports describe a similar figure, seen only briefly, often from the corner of the eye. The details vary too much to confidently claim they all describe the same apparition, but the location itself remains surprisingly consistent. Again, the building seems divided into distinct areas of experience. The wheel, the alcove, the corridors, and closing routes through the building late at night. Those final experiences may actually form the strongest part of the haunting tradition surrounding the Washford Mill, because they are also the hardest to dismiss entirely as storytelling. Multiple members of staff over the years have described unease during closing time once the building empties. The accounts are usually simple: feeling watched, hearing movement in otherwise quiet areas, rushing unnecessarily while locking up, feeling uncomfortable in particular corridors or near darkened sections of the building. One former employee later described how the atmosphere changed after the final customers left. During normal service, the building felt busy and ordinary, but once the lights were lowered and the public areas emptied, the silence became oppressive. They spoke about hurrying through the final checks because of the persistent feeling that someone was following just behind them through the building. They never claimed to see a figure directly, but the sensation itself remained vivid enough that they remembered it years later. Experiences like this are extremely common in old industrial buildings, especially those with complex acoustics and large empty internal spaces. Mills produce strange sound behaviour naturally. Water movement creates low-frequency vibration. Old timber structures shift constantly with temperature changes. Shadows move differently around partial industrial lighting and reflective surfaces. All of these factors can affect perception, especially when someone is alone late at night in a historically charged environment. But what keeps stories like those at Washford alive is repetition. People often experience similar feelings independently of one another, sometimes before hearing the older stories connected to the building. That does not prove anything supernatural, but it does explain why certain locations develop enduring reputations over time. As the years passed, the old mill gradually became woven into local folklore. Stories spread beyond employees and regular visitors. Paranormal groups occasionally mentioned the building online. Local ghost story collections began including it among Redditch area hauntings. The woman by the wheel slowly became part of the identity of the place itself. Yet even now, compared with many supposedly haunted sites, the stories remain restrained. There are no elaborate legends of murder hidden in the walls. No curses attached to the land. No famous historical spectres tied conclusively to the building. Instead, the haunted reputation of Washford Mill feels inseparable from the structure itself. The experiences are rooted in atmosphere, repetition, memory, and the physical reality of a building shaped by nearly 1,000 years of continuous human activity. Places like this occupy an unusual space between history and folklore. The mill is undeniably old. The industrial past is real. The waterwheel still turns behind glass where visitors can see it. Beneath the floors, water still moves through channels that have likely carried it since long before the present building existed. The workers who spent their lives there are mostly forgotten now, outside scattered records and local history archives. Yet traces of occupation remain in subtler ways. Worn stone, altered beams, patched walls, machinery scars, changes in floor level, blocked openings where older systems once passed through. And perhaps that is why the ghost stories attached to the place persist. Not because of any single dramatic event, but because buildings used continuously over centuries begin to feel layered with the presence of those who passed through them. Mills in particular were repetitive environments. The same movements carried out daily, the same sounds heard constantly, the same routes walked thousands upon thousands of times. When people glimpse movement near the wheel at Washford, or feel suddenly uncomfortable crossing the darkened bar after closing time, what unsettles them may not simply be the possibility of ghosts. It may be the feeling that the building itself has never entirely stopped working, that somewhere beneath the modern lights and polished tables, the older rhythms of the place still continue quietly in the background. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy these stories, you can support the podcast and get access to MP3s and PDF books over on Buy Me a Coffee. They're £1.50 each, or free if you're a member. You can find the link in the description. You can find everything at ghosttales.co.uk and follow the Facebook and Instagram pages at Ghost Tales Podcast.
Where is Daredevil? I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated. We're gonna take this city back. Over medicated. In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.